The Western Philosophy, Will Durant. Chapter 5. Voltaire, Section 2, London. Letters on the English. He set to work with courage to master the new language. He was displeased to find that plague had one syllable and ague two. He wished that plague would take one half the language and ague the other half. But soon he could read English well, and within a year he was master of the best English literature of the age. He was introduced to the literati by Lord Bolingbroke, and dined with one another of them, even with the elusive and corrosive Dean Swift. He pretended to know pedagogy and asked none of others. When Congreve spoke of his own place as trifles and desired to be considered rather a gentleman of leisure than an author, Voltaire said to him sharply, "If you had had the misfortune to be only a gentleman like any other, I should never have come to see you." What surprised him was the freedom with which Bolingbroke, Pope, Anderson, and Swift wrote whatever they pleased. Here was a people that had opinions of its own, a people that had remade its religion, hanged its kind, imported another, and built a parliament stronger than any ruler in Europe. There was no Bastille here, and no letters detached by which titled pensioners or royal idlers could send their untitled fools to jail without cause and without trial. Here were 30 religions, and not one priest here. Was the boldest sect of all, the Quakers, who astonished all Christendom by behaving like Christians. Voltaire never, to the end of his life, ceased to wonder at them. In the Dictionnaire Philosophy, he makes one of them say, "Our God, who has bidden us love our enemies and suffer evil without complaint, assuredly has no mind that we should cross the sea to go and cut the throats of our brothers, because murderers in red clothes and hats, 2 feet high, enlist citizens by making a noise with 2 sticks on an ass skin." It was an England, too, that throbbed with a virile intellectual activity. Bacon's name was still in the air, and the inductive mode of approach was triumphant in every field. Hobbes, 1588 to 1679, had carried out the skeptical spirit of the Renaissance and the practical spirit of his master into so complete and outspoken a materialism as would have won him in France the honor of martyrdom for a fallacy. Locke, 1632 to 1704, had written a masterpiece of psychological analysis, the Essay on the Human Understanding, 1689, without any supernatural assumption. Collins, Tyndall, and other deists were reaffirming their faith in God while calling into question every other doctrine of the established church. Newton has just died. Voltaire attended the funeral and often recalled the impression made upon him by the national honors awarded to this modest Englishman. Not long ago, he writes, a distinguished company were discussing the trite and frivolous question, who was the greatest man, Caesar, Alexander, Tamerlane, or Cromwell? Someone answered that without doubt it was Isaac Newton. And rightly, for it is to him who masters our minds by the force of truth, and not to those who enslave them by violence, that we owe our reverence. Voltaire became a patient and a thorough student of Newton's works, and was later the chief protagonist of Newton's views in France. One must marvel at the quickness with which Voltaire absorbed almost all that England had to teach him, its literature, its science, and its philosophy. He took all these varied elements, passed them through the fire of French culture and the French spirit, and transmuted them into the gold of Gallic wit and eloquence. He recorded his impressions in letters on the English, which he circulated in manuscript among his friends. He did not dare to print them, for they praised perfidious Aliband too highly to suit the taste of the royal censor. They contrasted English political liberty and intellectual independence with French tyranny and bondage. They condemned the idle aristocracy and the tithe-absorbing clergy of France, with their perpetual recourse to the Bastille as the answer to every question and every doubt. They urged the middle classes to rise to their proper place in the state, as these classes had in English. Without quite knowing or intending it, these letters were the first cockscrow of the Revolution. Section 3. Syriac, the Romances. Nevertheless, the regent, not knowing of this, Chanticleer sent Voltaire permission in 1729 to return to France. For 5 years, Voltaire enjoyed again that Parisian life whose wine flowed in his veins and whose spirit flowed from his pen. And then some miscreant of a publisher, getting hold of the letters on the English, turned them without the author's permission into print, and sold them far and wide, to the honor of all good Frenchmen, including Voltaire. The Parliament of Paris at once ordered the book to be publicly burned as scandalous, contrary to religion, to morals, and to respect for authority, and Voltaire learned that he was again on the way to the Bastille. Like a good philosopher, he took to his heels, merely utilizing the occasion to elope with another man's wife. The Marquis Duke Chatelet was 28. Voltaire, alas, was already 40. She was a remarkable woman. She had studied mathematics with the redoubtable Maupertuis, and then with Clairaut. She had written a learnedly annotated translation of Newton's Principia. She was soon to receive higher rating than Voltaire in a contest for a prize offered by the French Academy for an essay on the physics of fire. In short, she was precisely the kind of woman who never elopes. But the Marquis was so dull, and Voltaire was so interesting a creature, lovable in every way. She called him the finest ornament in France. He returned her love with fervent admiration, called her a great man whose only fault was being a woman, formed from her and from the large number of highly talented women then in France. His conviction of the native mental equality of the sexes, and decided that her chateau at Syriac was an admirable refuge from the inclement political weather of Paris. The Marquis was away with his regiment, which had long been his, avenue of escape from mathematics, and he made no objection to the new arrangements. Because of the manager's conventions, which forced rich old men on young women who had little taste for senility, but much hunger for romance. The morals of the day permitted a lady to add a lover to her menage if it were done with a decent respect for the hypocrisies of mankind, and when she chose not merely a lover but a genius, all the world forgave her. In the chateau at Cirey, they did not spend their time beating and cooing. All the day was taken up with study and research. Voltaire had an expensive laboratory equipped for work in natural science, and for years the lovers rivaled each other in discovery and disquisition. They had many guests, but it was understood that these should entertain themselves all day long till supper at 9. After supper, occasionally there were private theatricals or Voltaire would read to the guests one of his lively stories. Very soon Cirey became the Paris of the French mind. The aristocracy and the bourgeoisie joined in the pilgrimage to taste Voltaire's wine and wit, and see him act in his own place. He was happy to be the center of this corrupt and brilliant world. He took nothing too seriously, and for a while made Rire et Fetaire Rire his motto. Catherine of Russia called him the divinity of gaiety. If nature had not made us a little frivolous, he said, we should be most wretched. It is because one can be frivolous that the majority do not hang themselves. There was nothing of the dyspeptic color about him. Dur est dispers in loco. Woe to philosophers! We cannot laugh away their wrinkles. I look upon solemnity as a disease. It was now that he began to write those delightful romances, Zadig, Candide, Micromegas, Virginuc, Le Monde, Comme il va, etc., which give the Voltairean spirit in purer form than any other else in his 99 volumes. They are not novels, but humorous sequence novelette. The heroes are not persons but ideas. The villains are superstitions, and the events are thoughts. Some are mere fragments, like Linganuk, which is Rousseau before John Jenkins. A Huron Indian comes to France with some returning explorers. The first problem to which he gives rise is that of making him a Christian. An abbé gives him a copy of the New Testament, which the Huron likes so much that he soon offers himself not only for baptism but for circumcisions as well. For he says, I do not find in the book that was put into my hands a single person who was not circumcised. It is therefore evident that I must make a sacrifice to the Hebrew custom, and the sooner the latter. Hardly has this difficulty been smoothed over when he has trouble over confession. He asks where in the Gospel this is commanded, and is directed to a passage in the Epistle of St. James. Confess your sins to one another, he confesses. But when he had done he dragged the abbé from the confessional chair, placed himself in the seat, and bade the abbé confess in turn. Come, my friend, it is said we must confess our sins to one another. I have related my sins to you, and you shall not stir till you recount yours. He falls in love with Miss St. Eves, but is told that he cannot marry her because she has acted as godmother at his baptism. He is very angry at this little trick of the fates and threatens to get unbaptized. Having received permission to marry her, he is surprised to find that for marriage notarizes, priests, witnesses, contracts, and dispensations are absolutely necessary. You are then very great rogues, since so many precautions are required. And so, as the story passes on from incident to incident, the contradictions between primitive and ecclesiastical Christianity are forced upon the stage. One misses the impartiality of the scholar and the leniency of the philosopher. But Voltaire had begun his war against superstition, and in war we demand impartiality and leniency only of our foes. Micromegas is a limitation of swift, but perhaps richer than is modeled in cosmic imagination. The earth is visited by an inhabitant from Sinus. He is some 500,000 feet tall, as befits the citizen of so large a star. On his way through space, he has picked up a gentleman from Saturn who grieves because he is only a few thousand feet in height. As they walk through the Mediterranean, the Syrian wets his heels. He asks his comrade how many senses the Saturnians have, and is told, "We have 72, but we are daily complaining of the smaller number." To what age do you commonly live? Alas, a mere trifle. Very few on our globe survive 15,000 years. So you see that in a manner we begin to die the very moment we are born. Our existence is no more than a point, our duration an instant, and our globe an atom. Scarce do we begin to learn a little when death intervenes before we can profit by experience. As they stand in the sea, they take up a ship as one might pick up some animalcule, and the Syrian pies it on his thumb nail, causing much commotion among the human passengers. The chaplains of the ship repeated exorcism, the sailors swore, and the philosophers formed a system to explain this disturbance of the laws of gravity. The Syrian bends down like a darkening cloud and addresses them. O ye intelligent atoms, in whom the Supreme Being hath been pleased to manifest his omniscience and power. Without doubt, your joys on this earth must be pure and exquisite, for being unencumbered with matter and to all appearance little else than soul, you must spend your lives in the delights of pleasure and reflection, which are the true enjoyments of a perfect spirit. True happiness I have nowhere found, but certainly here it dwells. We have matter enough, answered one of the philosophers, to do abundance of mischief. You must know, for example, that at this very moment, while I am speaking, there are 100,000 animals of our own species covered with hats, slaying an equal number of their fellow creatures, who wear turbans. At least they are either slain or being slain, and this has usually been the case all over the earth from time immemorial. Miscreants, cried the indignant Syrians. I have a good mind to take 2 or 3 steps and trample the whole nest of such ridiculous assassins under my feet. Don't give yourself the trouble, replied the philosopher. They are industrious enough in securing their own destruction. At the end of 10 years, the 100th part of these wretches will not survive. Besides, the punishment should not be inflicted upon them, but upon those sedentary and slothful barbarians who, from their places, give orders for murdering 1,000,000 of men, and then solemnly thank God for their success. Next to Candide, which belongs to a later period of Voltaire life, the best of these tales is Zadig. Zadig was a Babylonian philosopher, as wise as it is possible for man to be. He knew as much of metaphysics as hath ever been known in any age. That is little or nothing at all. Jealousy made him imagine that he was in love with Semira. In defending her against robbers, he was wounded in the left eye. A messenger was dispatched to Memphis for the great Egyptian physician Hermes, who came with a numerous retinue. He visited Zadig and declared that the patient would lose his eye. He even foretold the day and hour when this fatal event would happen. Had it been the right eye, said he, I could easily have cured it, but the wounds of the left eye are incurable. Or Babylon lamented the fate of Zadig and admired the profound knowledge of Hermes. In 2 days, the abscess broke off its own accord, and Zadig was perfectly cured. Hermes wrote a book to prove that it ought not to have healed. Zadig did not read it. He hurried instead to Semira, only to find that upon hearing Hermila's first report, she had betrothed herself to another man, having, she said, an unconquerable aversion to one-eyed man. Zadig thereupon married a peasant woman, hoping to find in her the virtues which had been missing in the court lady Semira. To make sure of the fidelity of his wife, he arranged with a friend that he, Zadig, should pretend to die, and that the friend should make love to the wife an hour later. So Zadig had himself pronounced dead and lay in the coffin, while his friend first commiserated and then congratulated the widow, and at last proposed immediate marriage to her. She made a brief resistance, and then, protesting she would never consented. Zadig rose from the dead and fled into the woods to console himself with the beauty of nature. Having become a very wise man, he was made vizier to the king, to whose realm he brought prosperity, justice, and peace. But the queen fell in love with him, and the king, perceiving it, began to be troubled. He particularly remarked that the queen's shoes were blue, and the Zadig's shoes were blue, that his wife's ribbons were yellow, and that Zadig's bonnet was yellow. He resolved to poison them both, but the queen discovered the plot and sent a note to Zadig. Fly, I conjure thee, by our mutual love and our yellow ribbons. Zadig again fled into the woods. He then represented to himself the human species as it really is, as a puzzled insect devouring one another on a little atom of clay. This true image seemed to annihilate his misfortunes by making him sensible of the nothingness of his own being and that of Babylon. His soul launched into infinity and detached from the senses, contemplated the immutable order of the universe. But when, afterwards returning to himself, he considered that the queen has perhaps died for him, the universe vanished from sight. Passing out of Babylon, he saw a man cruelly beating a woman. He responded to her cries for help, fought the man, and at last, to save himself, struck a blow which killed his enemy. Thereupon he turned to the lady and asked, "What further, madame, wouldst thou have me do for thee?" "Die, villain!" "Die, villain, for thou hast killed my lover. Oh, that I were able to tear out thy heart. Oh, that I were able to tear out thy heart." Zadig was shortly afterward captured and enslaved, but he taught him master philosophy and became his trusted counselor. Through his advice, the practice of sati, by which a widow had herself buried with her husband, was abolished by a law which required that before such martyrdom the widow should spend an hour alone with a handsome man sent on a mission to the king of Serendib. Zadig taught him that an honest minister could best be found by choosing the lightest dancer among the applicants. He had the vestibule of the dance hall filled with loose valuables easily stolen, and arranged that each candidate should pass through the vestibule alone and unwatched. When they had all entered, they were asked to dance. Never had dancers performed more unwillingly or with less grace. Then heads were down, their backs bent, their hands pressed to their sides, and so the story rushes on. We can imagine those evenings at Syria. The section is over.